Okay, I think we're live. Hi, everyone. Okay, so hello, everyone. I am streaming live. This is the first ever episode of Beverly's Breakroom. No matter where you are and watching, it's a pleasure to be on live with you today. My name is Beverly. I am a Chief Operating Officer and your Chief Empowerment Officer. And this is a new connection opportunity show to talk about the real talk. So, y'all know what a break room is, right? When we're in the break room, what are we talking about? We're talking about the tea. We're talking about what's really happening behind closed doors. But most importantly, we are educating and uplifting, and we're preparing ourselves for what's out there, and supporting each other in the process. If you are not familiar with me, hello, it is so nice to meet you. I am a chief operating officer who's been scaling operations for over a decade, in over 10 fields. And I have dedicated my platform to uplifting and providing education on a lot of the things that are gate kept, no matter whether you work in corporate, healthcare, higher education, and anything in between. I am spilling the real tea. So today is the first episode. If you are new to my platform, feel free to follow, feel free to like, comment. I'm really excited to be on, and we're just going to jump right to work. So if you already know what's up, then let's get going. So we are talking today about when your boss is your bully. So a lot of times when I go on socials, and I'm going on live, one of the main things that people ask me is, Beverly, what's our topic for today? What are we talking about? And I cannot stress enough that uh, we we're going to have topics now. And I recently posted a video talking about when your boss is toxic. So if you're about to head into the work week this week and you're dealing with the boss who is trying you this way and that and the third, this is the episode for you. If you did not get a chance to see that video, I am going to try to cue it up here so that you can hear it, and then we will come right back. If your boss is bullying you at work, here is one reason from a chief operating officer as to why that's happening and what you can do to fight back. Hi, my name is Beverly. I'm a chief operating officer who scaled operations for over a decade and your chief empowerment officer. There are a lot of reasons as to why toxic leaders bully their staffs, but today we're talking about one that often goes overlooked. They are bullying you because you are more competent than they are. It is no secret that a lot of people in business or corporate have gotten to where they are in their careers because of networking, who they know, and frankly, what they know, not necessarily on talent itself. And for a lot of toxic leaders, they are incredibly threatened by employees and co-leaders who are competent and capable in ways that they know that they're not. I personally have worked in organizations where people had been grandfathered into roles because of who they knew at the time and have been sitting in those roles for decades. These same leaders would get incredibly threatened and do everything they could to sabotage rising leaders because they knew that if they continue to rise, it might just be their job. So what do you do? If you are shining at work, or at minimum know that you are crushing it at your job, and you have a leader that has a problem with that, well, I can't give you tips that will stop that person from being a hateful son of a. Here's what you're going to do. Document, because a lot of these folks are unoriginal. If they are retaliating against you, discriminating against you, or other avenues that you can prove a pattern of, that is going to be your goldenrod to get you the justice that you deserve while you are actively pursuing roles and opportunities outside of that organization. A lot of folks get stuck in saying, I just want them to leave me alone. I just want to keep my head down and do my job. But here's what nobody wants to tell you that I'm going to tell you. Your light is threatening to them. So they're never going to leave you alone. Document, and prepare your pathway so that in the event that they continue to escalate, you now have a pattern of retaliation, discrimination, alternative treatment. These toxic leaders are not expecting you to self-advocate. They're expecting you to keep your head down, and then they win. And if they win, that means they get to stay in these positions while they're harming other people. The best way to get back at a toxic leader is by leaving and elevating yourself in the process, or filing a claim with the EEOC if it continues to escalate and you have a proven pattern of discrimination or retaliation. You deserve better than to deal with bullying in the workplace. And in workplace warfare, all is fair in the battlefield. So start documenting. So you heard that. And it's the truth. For those of you who are experiencing bullying at work, first and foremost, please know that I am with you and support. It is far too common. And after I posted this video, I got inspired because the comment section was alight, both on Instagram and on TikTok, with people who are sharing their real concerns and their own experiences, as well as questions. And I thought, what better way to kick off this series and this new way of connecting with all of you than by digging into that. The structure of Beverly's Break Room is I'm going to be showing a resource or showing something that is relevant, and then offering and then also too, highlighting your comments, and then there'll be Q&A at the end too, because I also want to make sure this is a mutual break room. So if you have questions as we chat today, make sure you stick around and make sure you're liking and engaging with this content so more folks can see that we are live and I'm going to be answering some of your questions. One of the things that really stuck out to me is and I actually commented and said, I think I'm going to make a video about this, but better still, I'm like, you know what? No, I'm going to feature this in our first ever Beverly's Break Room. Is this amazing community member said, I've noticed something else that fosters toxic workplaces. Managers who get all of their fulfillment from work without meaningful relationships or interests outside of work, they blur personal emotions with what should be in personal business. The result is unrealistic expectations for employees, tearing others down to feel accomplished, resentment towards employee successes, etc. And I did comment on this comment and said, you know what, you got me an idea, because I think this is a really great starting point with why. Why do toxic leaders, why are they toxic? Why are toxic bosses, why do they belittle their teams? Why do you have to potentially have anxiety today? It's Sunday, you may have MLK day off tomorrow, or you may not, or maybe heading into Tuesday, right? That anxiety that you fear heading into the workplace. Why are leaders rude? And I loved this perspective because as a chief operating officer, I have had the privilege of being able to work with and interact with hundreds of leaders across the country. And I cannot stress enough how accurate this is. One of the main reasons I feel why leaders are toxic is because they are exactly this. They have enmeshed their fulfillment from work. And you want to think about the fact that when you have an identity that's surrounded by one thing, how many of you, your work isn't everything? Maybe you have some friends, right? Maybe you have family, maybe you have hobbies, maybe you have interests, and your work isn't the most important thing to you. That immediately becomes threatening to leaders who don't like that. They don't like that you have interests outside of work. They don't like that you're not available on the weekends. They're not vibing with the fact that you are concerned about your work life balance. They don't like that because they didn't have that, or because work has become everything for them. And especially with more senior leaders, there is an expectation that you should not have a life outside of work, that your life should revolve around the work. So then what happens, right, when you're making sure that those boundaries are clear, or you start setting boundaries after realizing that they have been crossed? Well, now you're going to be a threat, and then there comes the toxicity that some of you might feel. The other element too, if I'm, being really empathetic as somebody who has experienced this, is, and I'm going to ask the audience, feel free to comment, please, if you resonate with this. For a lot of us, we're rewarded for self-sacrifice. We're rewarded for participating in the kikiing of it all, right? The chatter in the office, going to the happy hours, being highly invested. We are rewarded for that. So then you have to imagine that when you decide to step away, or if you say, well, I'm really digging into this because I want to be promoted. Well, the toxicity is again going to come into play when it appears that you're no longer playing ball. So there's a very tough balance to strike, because I know in my experience, there's been many times where I was responding to slacks. I actually had a situation once where a couple of years ago, I was out with some friends at Top Golf. We had planned this for a while, and we were getting food, and I had made a commitment to myself that night. I said, you know what? I'm not going to look at my phone. There's nothing that's so much of an emergency that I can't solve. At this point, I had a team under me that absolutely could have handled anything. We get to the restaurant, and I'll never forget getting a phone call that this customer had written a really negative review, and they had blasted it all over Google, and they had put this, negative review everywhere. And the team was frantically calling me because they're like, Beverly, you're so good with customers. Can you please, talk to this person and see if they can reverse the review? Now, mind you, this is 9 p.m. It was late. It was after work hours. Anybody else looking at this situation would have been like, this isn't urgent. But apparently they were a social media influencer, or there's somebody with a large following. And they said, if this doesn't get rectified, I'm going to let my following know that I'm not really happy about how I was treated. And I pushed back and I said, guys, everybody on the team should feel comfortable being able to try to rectify this issue. And they're like, no, Beverly, you're the best at this, da, 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 da. And while in any other context, you might be flattered, right? You might be like, wow, I'm needed. This is great. I remember the look on my friends' faces where they were like, again? Because I went into a bathroom to call this person who was on the West Coast. And I called them, I talked them down. We were able to rectify the issue. I'm in the bathroom. I think I was on the phone with them for over an hour. They wound up writing me an incredibly glowing review, right? But you have to think about the death of a thousand cuts. And for a lot of leaders who especially have fallen into toxic patterns, there are a lot of cuts that they have, of course, subscribe to as leaders will, to continue to rise. But then where does that line come from when you now start making other employees suffer because you made the choices that you made? And I think that's where that lack of emotional maturity is seen a lot by employees is, well, just because you made the choices, and when I think about myself, just because I made the choices doesn't mean that my team should have to do that. But a lot of leaders feel bitterness, and they haven't addressed that bitterness because of how hard they had to climb or how far they had to go to get where they want to go. So when you come in and you have audacity, right? Like, they don't like that. So, I really love this comment because it's really the truth. And in my experience, I've seen it in so many different industries where, I have nothing but at this point as a leader, I'm more so of the position like, listen, get out of here. Like so many times I would get little slaps on the wrist for letting my team leave early, or if they had PTO and they, do I need to take a half day? I'm like, no, like what are you doing? But it was because I remember how burnt out I was. If you're not able to do that reflection, then you're going to bully. You're going to not even go the length of bullying. You're going to at least have a resentment, which is then again where I believe a lot of bullying then comes from. Now, this was a comment that I thought was really funny. I read this and I was like, oh, I have to include it. She said, HR told me to stop sending long emails following a meeting. And I told her it was for the sake of clashing and keeping record of what was spoken about. So I then sent another one explaining why I send long emails about my meetings. LOL. And I thought that was hilarious, but also a really telling thing. How many of you in your life, in your career, have been told or have felt that HR is not your friend? Probably many of you, if not the majority of you. And a lot of times, right, when you are dealing with a toxic leader, when you're navigating a toxic workplace situation, it immediately a lot of people will tell you go to HR. I know in my previous videos and even current ones, I will say that there are steps you should go to with HR in order to self-advocate, because especially if you're going to pursue legal action later, if you're going to go to the EEOC, you do have to have a record that you tried to rectify it internally. But then what happens, right? When HR is like, "Hey, can you stop sending, these long emails well, that's your only protection." And here's the thing about dealing with bullies at work that a lot of people grossly underestimate. It is sometimes as simple as documenting your meeting agenda, what was discussed, and high level, keeping it super brief, no longer than a page. This is what we discussed. These are the action items. Are we all on the same page? If they agree and they email back, yep, we're all on the same page. But then months later, when maybe they're mad at you, or maybe you did something that they didn't like, whatever it is, right? And they try to say that you haven't been meeting expectations. If you start for yourself as a practice where I don't really care, because I don't know how many of you have had leaders where you don't get agendas, you don't get onboarded, you don't get systems, right? And I can't tell you how many times leaders have worked with, or employees and leaders alike have met with me and they've said, Beverly, well, I haven't gotten, agendas, or I haven't got start making your own. Well, of course, yes, HR may feel a way about that if it's consistent, because then it kind of starts looking like, well, why are you collecting all this documentation? But at the same time, you are your biggest protector. HR, as somebody who has led HR departments, as somebody who's led recruitment teams, I know that HR's job is to protect the organization. And so when you are in a situation where your leader is toxic, never feel guilty about asking for follow-up. And it can be casual. I think sometimes too, and I've seen this a lot on my platform since starting to talk more about this, is that folks go to the nth degree pretty quickly because you've been experiencing this and you've been frustrated and you've been feeling harmed and you've been feeling hurt. So what are you going to do? You're going to start quickly, okay, let me compile this, let me send these long emails to HR. Well, immediately then that's going to get them on edge versus quick emails here and there documenting. And yeah, absolutely. Hey, just wanted to let you know this is what we discussed. Are we all in alignment? Everything feels great. I cannot stress enough that good leaders will love this. Good leaders love documentation. They love accountability because it keeps the pressure off of them having to, check behind everything that you're doing. If you're keeping agendas, if you're keeping documentation tight, if you're, tracking what's being said in meetings and all of that, especially for good leaders that you deserve to have in the future, they're going to be so grateful that you have this method, because then again, when ish does hit the fan, whether maybe it's not even a toxic leader in the future, maybe it's a toxic employee who doesn't like that you're shining because you shine, then what's going to happen is they're going to be able to say, well, listen, they've always kept their documentation tight. That is something about me in my career that was really consistent, is everyone knew Beverly kept her documentation tight. So having that as a core part of your process as an employee is really important. And I think it emphasizes that no matter what your toxic leader is doing, remember you are to protect yourself. I do want to go back to the why though, because as we talk in the break room again, as a C-suite leader, I've met all types of folks. And one of the things that has also really struck me in what um I think can sometimes be difficult no matter where you are in your career journey, is that I have been told directly from, folks, oh, my leader is so toxic, my leader is so toxic. And really they're just holding them accountable. Or really they're just maybe a bit more direct, or a bit more uh uh they have higher expectations than previous leaders past. There was one example where I had an employee who had mentioned that their previous leaders were very lax. They didn't really, check up on them. They didn't, whatever the case. I can't speak for those leaders. All I know is how I lead, right? And so I would have, accountability metrics where I would say, hey, this is transparent. Here's what I'm expecting at by the end of the quarter. Let me know how I can support. We'd have weekly one-on-ones. We'd be having touch bases, all this. And I said, this is the main thing is I expect, unless there's an extraneous circumstance, these are my expectations. And I am very transparent about that and onboarding so that everyone understands what's expected of them. And so that there's no surprises throughout, because then we're tracking the same things together. And I'll never forget at the end of the quarter, this employee who over the course of, 3 months, I had been working with them and I've been trying to figure out, why this, their particular metrics weren't really getting to where they needed to be. We had, tried all different types of strategies and it just wasn't quite getting there. I said, hey, this doesn't look really great. I'm going to say that in the, this is something that has to be worked on because of, and I explain the business case. A lot of leaders won't go that length of explaining the business case. I'm like, if this doesn't get done, or if this metric doesn't get met, here's all of the impacts to it. Well, they felt that was toxic and they said as much. And they were like, it really feels like you're picking on me. It really feels like and of course, I'm like, hey, that's not the perspective. There's so many times that I'm celebrating. And, I want to these are the same conversations I'm having with everyone. And I remember afterwards, they got very frustrated with me because they felt like I was really truly the first leader that had ever held them accountable, and was continuously holding them accountable. And I do want to say that that does not mean that if you are for most cases, people who are saying they're experiencing toxicity, they know what the heck that is. But that is something to think about too. If you feel like your boss is always on you or on your case, or, constantly talking about stuff you've got going on, and you notice that they're having similar conversations with everyone else on the team, they may not necessarily be toxic. They may just be a hard butt. And if that is the case, then that is also something that's data for you, because you are entitled to think about your leadership journey, or the leadership type that you want to have, just as much as anybody else. Because I will tell you that in the interview process, you would ask about their leadership style, because I knew the type of leadership style that worked best for me. And I also knew that when I got new leadership or new folks coming in, if they didn't have the leadership style that I liked or felt was in alignment with how I learn best, lead best, especially because I'm responsible for leading people, I knew that I was not going to be at that company very much longer, because I knew that our leadership styles were going to clash. So remember, you're always in the driver's seat that way. Um, and then here was another comment that I thought was really relevant for this conversation, right? Of, toxicity. This commenter said, "You are absolutely right to document everything. I took an FMLA to find another job. I left my job and HR had me do an exit interview. I explained to them about my manager who was micromanaging and bullying. I gave them emails and I had coworkers that witnessed the bullying. Needless to say, HR told me that they had a lot of complaints against this manager. Well, 6 months after I left, this manager was terminated because she was bullying another employee. My former coworkers were calling to tell me the good news about her." How many of you have experienced this where you believe that maybe, because a lot of bullies, this is their tactic. This is what they do. They make you feel like you're the only person who has the concerns that you have. I have had this experience where I was really not I there was a leader and I who were very much at odds, and I did not appreciate the way that I was being treated on their team. And I expressed this as much, and I'm like, "Hey, I can't help but feel like XYZ. And they were like, "Well, nobody else has complained about this. Now you seem to be the only everybody else is getting along. Everybody else is figuring it out." That is done on purpose to isolate you, because if you feel isolated and you feel like you're the only person who has the concerns that you have, well, are you going to retaliate? Are you going to fight for yourself? Are you going to feel like you can fight for yourself? Are you going to go to HR? Are you going to go to No, you're not. You're not. You're going to feel like you're going to feel gaslit, and a lot of toxic leaders gaslight, and you're going to feel like there's nobody to go to. And that is on purpose. That is designed on purpose for you to feel that way. So, um, it's I can't stress enough that a lot of times when you complain, and this is coming from somebody who led an HR department at multiple points in my career, and managed employee complaints as a senior leader. I cannot tell you how many times, if you have a problem with that employee, somebody else already has. If you have a problem with that leader, somebody else probably has. I can Do not listen to bullies tell you that you don't have nobody's complaining, because it's just not true. They may not be complaining to them, but case in point, there was one time I worked at an organization that had a person on the team who was notorious for being a bit tough to work with. And actually, I've worked at many organizations where this has been the case, but for this example, right? Um, uh, a person came to me after tolerating and dealing with this employee for a long time. And they said to me, "Beverly, I might be the only person who's concerned, but I just really cannot stand XYZ, XYZ." And they listed all these examples. They had no clue that a couple hours prior, I got out of another meeting about that same employee with another complaint from another leader on the team. I just gotten out a couple hours prior from somebody else complaining about this person. So the silence only protects the company. It does not protect you. And you want to always be in a position where you're able to self-advocate with, and when they try to tell you, no, 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 you don't need to self-advocate because you're the only person who thinks that way. No, that's gaslighting. And it's gaslighting so that you don't report and that you don't self-advocate for yourself. And toxic leaders are very good at that, because they know that if people band together to share their concerns, and those toxic leaders might be in trouble. Okay. So, and I'm taking a look at the comment section super quick. Thank you all so much for being on. If you don't already follow, please click follow. Please subscribe if you're watching me on YouTube. It's so great to see you. I'm going to be doing this every Monday or Sunday through Friday, or Sunday through Thursday. Look at me, right? Sunday through Thursday at 6 p.m. talking about the real talk together. So make sure you set your calendar 6 p.m., set that alarm because we're going to be on here together talking about all things Breakroom and the team. Okay. And tactics as well. And if you are watching on a Sunday, make sure that you head to my website, beverlydines.com, where you can register for Sunday Scaries, which is tonight at 7 p.m. You do have to register for that because that is a private community where I teach every Sunday night to prepare you for the week and prevent those Sunday Scaries. So if you have not already registered for that, so I can see you at 7 p.m. Central every Sunday, make sure you go to my website where you can get that link and I can join you there. Or I will see you there at 7 p.m. today. So looking at the comments really quick, um, I see one comment. Mine left when I took FMLA. I think she got scared that something was up and I never contacted her. Yep. A lot of leaders who've gotten their careers off of being bullies, they're gonna jump. They're gonna be scared. Let me see some other comments. I love this. Please take every hour of PTO and do not overshare at work. They shouldn't know your PTO plans. Ooh, we're going to deviate on this for a little bit. Should you tell your employers about what you're doing on PTO, what you're doing on the weekend? As a chief operating officer, I believe that there is a balance to strike when it comes to disclosing anything that's personal because at one point you have to, it's the reality of the thing. If your intention is to scale in your career, if your intention is to grow in your career, you have to politic. I hate it. I get it because sometimes it can feel disingenuous, but it's the truth. You have to politic. You have to feel personable and relatable. And a lot of the time, the perception is, are you, hip with the team or are you keeping to yourself? Even if you choose to be, what's the word? Like if you choose to be maybe a bit more private, you're entitled to that. But I have seen employees who are like, it's not anybody's business what I do on the weekends. It's not anybody's business what I do after hours. It's not anybody's business what I do on PTO. It's not anybody's business. Are those the folks that get promoted? Not typically in my experience, because leadership wants to feel like there is a chumminess about it. So how do you balance that? Because I agree, take that PTO first and foremost, because far too many people let that ish roll over, or they don't take it because they're waiting for a reason to take it. Take that thing. And my recommendation is to schedule PTO every 3 months, either a Friday or a Thursday and Friday for a long weekend, parlay it with a holiday weekend. Even if you don't have plans, you can always cancel your PTO. I cannot stress enough how important it is that you remember that, because even if you don't take it, at least you'd be surprised. There's been times where I have done this. This is a method I've been doing for years, where I will have PTO ready to go and scheduled months in advance. And it always comes at a time where I am not complaining about taking that PTO. So it's really important to make sure you set that for yourself. But when you do, there's a balance to strike. I believe that one of the most important things that you can do, and maybe this is an exercise you can do this week, is make a list for yourself of what's off limits. So many of us just kind of find ourselves in situations at work where we're networking, or we're faced with somebody asking a personal question about ourselves, or somebody's prying and we don't feel prepared because we're like, oh, you have to politic, but you don't want to overshare and you don't want people in your business. It can be really complicated. And so make a list this week of the things that you know are off limits and the things that are on limits. So maybe you're comfortable with talking about your sports hobbies, or maybe you're comfortable with talking about the things that excite you and, the movies you watch, maybe TV shows. Think about the things that are on limit for you, right? And then make that list of things that are off limits. Maybe I'm not talking about my family at work. Maybe I'm not talking about my side hustles. And as a COO, I'd absolutely recommend don't talk to people about your side hustles. And let me know in the comments if you want me to do a video about that, because there's all types of reasons why you should not let your company know if you're getting bread elsewhere. Um, so make that list for yourself this week and then start committing that list to memory, because here's what's going to happen. If somebody comes up to you at work, especially a toxic boss, because a lot of times toxic boss, bringing it back to subject, right? A lot of times toxic bosses will pry on purpose because they're trying to poke through what they can get to know about you that they could eventually either use to manipulate you, use to undermine you later, or use to kind of curate a narrative about you if you're no longer playing their game. Not the game, because you're good at playing it. You wouldn't be watching Beverly's Breakroom if you weren't good at it, right? But their game, right? So, when you get a question, what do you say? My recommendation is to then, if they say, oh, what are you doing this weekend? You're not going to tell them that you're going to your family reunion, or that you have a funeral, or that you have a birthday party, or that you got a bar mitzvah, or that you got whatever. You're not going to do that, right? What I do is I talk about the things that are on limit. So I'll go, oh, you know what? I'm going to karaoke this weekend. I'm really excited about that. And I reading this really great book recently. Have you been reading anything recently? I immediately start talking about the things that I know I'm comfortable with talking about. So then two things happen. One, you are benefiting because you are now politicking in a way that feels safe and feels boundaried for you. But two, they win because they feel like you're politicking with them and you're giving them information, but you're giving them information that you're comfortable with. This isn't just something off the cuff that you're now feeling stressed about. Oh, I see some comments. Please do a video on the side hustles. Okay. I will. So, but you're when you're boundaried, you're able to say, okay, you know what? Um, if I get asked this question, I know what to talk about. If somebody asks me about my family, I know how to redirect. Because that happens. A lot of times people love to pry. And you want to be prepared. So make that list this week, and then that'll help you stay in that mindset, especially if you got a toxic job right now. Um, I see some comments from YouTube. And thank you so much for this comment. How to handle age discrimination from a toxic leader. So this is actually a great segue into Q&A. So that's going to be, look at this little, y'all. Look at this. So we're going to go into Q&A. I'm going to first start with some preloaded questions that actually were sent in. I'm going to answer this question as well, and then I'll answer comments from Instagram too. Before we jump into Q&A though, I do have a message from my sponsors. So we're going to jump into that and then be right back. So stick around and make sure that you are ready to go with your questions if you have any about those toxic leaders. Today's episode is sponsored by Create the Door. If you've ever felt stuck, undervalued, or unseen in your personal or professional journey, Create the Door will show you how to break the cycle for good. Beverly Dines, a powerhouse leader in creative force, shares her 8-step framework for manifesting success. Whether you're pivoting careers, chasing a dream, or tired of waiting for someone to let you in, combining real-world strategy, data-driven insights, and personal stories, Create the Door teaches you how to identify your true capital W why, leveraging your hidden skills, and build a life where opportunities don't just happen. You make them. Create the Door is available now at beverlydines.com and Amazon. This episode is also sponsored by Foxy. Ever felt like you want to be more creative, but something is holding you back? Maybe it's fear, perfectionism, or the belief that you're just not artistic. Foxy is here to help you break through those barriers. Foxy is an online art education platform that helps you explore your creativity in a safe, supportive environment. Founded by passionate educators, that creativity isn't just about making art. It's about living a more fulfilling life. With step-by-step courses, creative exploration classes, and a community that gets it, Foxy gives you the tools and confidence to tackle not just the technical skills, but the mindset challenges that keep you feeling stuck. Whether you're at a complete beginner level or looking to try something new, Foxy makes creativity accessible, and check them out at foxy.com and start your creative journey today. Okay, so now it is time for Q&A. I have some preloaded questions that were asked, and we're going to start with those because these were some good questions. So for those of you who are just tuning in, welcome back to Beverly's Break Room. My name is Beverly. I'm a Chief Operating Officer and your Chief Empowerment Officer, spilling the real tea in the break room about all things business, career, and the gate kept things that are often kept from everyone, really, frankly. And today's topic is, what if my boss is my bully? So we're right here in Q&A. So get those questions ready to go when you're ready. But starting first with, what if your boss isn't bullying, but the opposite, not being a boss? They're doing their own thing and assuming you'll pick up their slack and take on all the work they assign you, even their work, but are oh so kind and politically savvy. In my opinion, this is a really toxic form of leadership, though, right? Because it's not outward toxicity. it's not it's actually, it's alienating in a way, right? Because what happens when you have a leader that is basically telling you to lead yourself? Well, on the one hand, you might think to yourself, well, this is great because now I have autonomy. I'm in a position where I'm able to, I can create my own schedule, create my own projects, and in some ways that can be really great, but in other ways it becomes a trap, because if they're doing their own thing and they're assuming you'll figure it out or you'll scoop up whatever, well, that means that the expectations become very nebulous. It means that at any point they could say that you're not meeting expectations, even though they never gave you expectations to begin with. And so when you are dealing with somebody who is not necessarily outright bullying you, but they're making it clear that they're not willing to invest in you, that is still toxic leadership, because that is, and it's not a leader really, it's management. It's toxic management because they're not trying to lead you. They're really not even trying to manage you. So what do you do? Well, if you have a boss that is not letting you, they're not onboarding you, they're not training you, they're not giving you anything to be able to work off of. I actually have a client who worked with me last week. She and I met, who is experiencing this right now. And what I told her is, you have to sometimes go to these leaders and you have to communicate to them exactly what you're looking for. So, for example, if they're telling you to, figure it out, you are passionate about your career. At minimum, you want to make sure that you are set up for success. And so what you can do is you can schedule a one-on-one with them, or if they have already one-on-one cadences with you, prepare for that one. And before you get to that one-on-one cadence, I want you to sit down and think about, what are three priorities in your department or in your area that you think that you could lead and take on, that are relevant to your role, but also most importantly relevant to where you want to go in your career. After you've defined what those things are, and a lot of times you can, if they're like, for example, in operations, if I look around and I see that there aren't any SOPs that are for a specific project, okay, that could be one thing. Or if I see that we're missing systems relating to a certain infrastructure, that's something else. And so make that list and pick your top three. When you go to that meeting with your supervisor, I want you to say to them, hey, I really appreciate how you have given me a lot of freedom in this role to not only, have autonomy, but also to, you know, lead in my own right. And, you lead from that place of appreciation, because you don't want to come out right and say, hey, you know, I feel like I'm not really being led. I feel like I'm not getting direction. That is not something you want to say, because if you say, I feel like I'm not getting direction, well, now they're going to be on the defensive. But if you come in and say, hey, I really appreciate that you've given me a lot of autonomy, they may not have intended for that, especially if they're like politically savvy, like this writer says. But you're now giving them a compliment, which is going to take their, excuse me, it's going to take their guard down, and they're going to be a little bit more responsive to you. You then can come to the table after you've said that, and you can say, hey, I really appreciate, everything we've got going on. And I wanted to bring these three projects your way because these are some things I'd really like to focus on. Let me know what you think. And do you believe that these topics are, do you believe that they are relevant to our goals and our current metrics right now? What you're doing by that point is you're taking initiative by crafting the three projects that are going to give you some direction, since your leader isn't giving you any. But the next thing you're going to do is you're going to wait, because if your leader tells you either A, yep, this is an alignment, this looks great, thanks for your initiative, great. You now have very clear and concrete expectations that you can use to then guide you forward. And once you're through with those three projects, you can then go back and repeat the cycle over and over again until you either leave that position or you get elevated and you're no longer under that leader. If they go with B, which is, that's not really in alignment, actually, I would prefer if you were focused more on X, that's still a good thing, because now they're forced in a really indirect way to give you direction in a way that they weren't doing before. And so with you being in a position to kind of curtail that, they can tell you, no, actually, I would prefer you to be doing this. The C kind of way, that is, the not so great one, is, no, really, we just want you to continue to observe or continue doing what you're doing. Like, we really don't need you to be jumping on any more projects. If they shoot it down entirely and they don't give you direction as to where next to go, that is a signal flare that you are not in a good situation. Because at that point, they are communicating to you that they like that you have a nebulous job description. They like that they can make up on the fly what your role and responsibilities are, and that becomes very dangerous to you when it comes time for potential layoffs, when it comes time for changes in departments, because then they can say, well, they've been getting the lay of the land, they've been great, but we really wish they'd been focused on X, but you tried to go to them and you tried to get XYZ and they didn't give it to you. So pay attention to those answers. And if you don't get something that is satisfactory or something that's a direction, that is a good point for you to update your resume and start applying, because you deserve direction. You deserve at minimum a a clear pathway as to what's expected of you. Going back to this question from YouTube, how to handle age discrimination. Thank you for this question. So, if you're experiencing age discrimination from a toxic leader, this is oftentimes, at least in my experience, I have received age discrimination at two different companies I've worked for. At least that was outright, that I very much knew, and they made it clear that it was age discrimination. And it was from older leaders. I've always been the youngest senior leader on every team that I have served on, and so what has come with that is unfortunate perceptions about my youth and what that means. And so, what do you do, right, when you have a leader that is very clearly making? Well, first of all, you want to identify if they are very outwardly excluding you, or they are targeting you because of your age. So, in my example, I would often get, at one company I worked for, I would often get very dismissive comments from leadership about, my ability to be able to do something, because I had only been a senior operator for, they would say like, oh, you've only been, a senior leader for XYZ years, you know, so and so. Mind you, in this particular context, I had the most experience relating to the issue that we were discussing out of everyone in that room combined. And I said as much, and they're like, yeah, but you're still, like you're still green, you're still green. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I have a C next to my name, just like a C next to my title, just like everybody else. And so in those moments, if you're experiencing outward, like it's very clear, like they're not giving you projects because of age. And this is in the inverse too. If this because you're older, maybe they think that you can't keep up. Maybe they think that, oh, this is going to take a little bit of time. It's these passive aggressive comments. Pay attention to those, because you may have an opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to start documenting this because, I've talked about my friend EEOC. Age discrimination is a protected class federally. And so if you have multiple patterns of discrimination from a toxic leader, and you have those patterns of evidence that support that they are outwardly discriminating against you because of your age, that is a potential claim with the EEOC. So absolutely document that pattern. If they're just being a jerk, like maybe they're teasing about, like right now there's a trend on TikTok, for example, where millennial and Z's are asking each other, like, what year were you born? And then it'll say 19, and then it'll cut. And then they have something from the prehistoric age, or somebody will put 2000, it'll cut, and it'll be like a baby. Those types of situations, there's a fine line to strike. If everybody's bought in on the joke, then it's funny, right? It may not be funny to you, and you can express as much and say, hey, I know everybody's bought on this, but like, I'm a little sensitive just because it's something that's, a boundary for me. There's nothing wrong with saying that. But if you have somebody who's making little digs like that or little jokes, like pay attention to that, because there's a fine line where it can then turn into discrimination. But also, you very well may be in a scenario where you just have a jerk who's a leader, and maybe they think it's okay to make those comments. So pay attention between the difference of outwardly bullying based off of a protected class, or just kind of being a jerk. Um, This next question was, what about toxic managers playing victim after bullied employees resign? So this is something that is really tricky, right? So if you are somebody who has a toxic leader who then acts like they're the victim when held accountable, or when somebody has resigned, here's one thing that you can do right away. Document, 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 document. Go back to your documentation, because I cannot stress you enough, when people's memories fail, when subjectivity prevails, documentation wins every time. So if somebody tries to say, well, I was the one who was being targeted, and I was the one who was this and that and the third, okay, if you can come back to the table and say, well, actually, on this date at this time, this happened, and on this date of this, it immediately nullifies that person's complaint and it immediately neutralizes that toxic leader. So, documentation is going to be a saving grace from you, whether you show it to them or not beforehand. If after they've been held accountable, they try to, spin this narrative like they're a victim, you have documentation that you can pull out and say, hey, listen, help me understand where this came from. Um, Another person asked, what if you're not being considered for a promotion because your lead is sabotaging you? Oh, and she sleeps half the day but expects people to pick up her slack. Please comment in the comments if you've had this situation where you are being purposefully um slighted because somebody, who was leading you did not want you to be did not want you to grow. I have had this experience. I've had this experience several times in my career, especially being a young woman, especially being a young woman of color. It is something that is very prevalent in corporate spaces. You kind of get this side eye of like, oh wait, who do you think you are? Like, why are you growing? What do you mean you're going to be this by the time you're what? And I've had leaders straight to my face, giggle when I would say, oh, I'm going to be a C-suite by the time I'm 30, and they would look at me like, yeah, okay, because it took them however long it took them. And a lot of folks, I cannot stress enough, if you are facing this right now, this has nothing to do with you. If your leader is actively sabotaging your progression, I am telling you, you are doing something right. Because what it means is that you are killing it. Your light is shining bright. You are innovating. You are keeping up. You're doing their work and doing it better than them. Listen, because every time I've had a leader who has sabotaged my growth, I knew it was because I was threatening to them. Either I was more creative, I was faster. The team, I had more buy-in from the team. This happens a lot when new leadership comes into town and they get the lay of the land and they realize, oh, people like you. Oh, you're popular. They try to cut you down a couple pegs because they realize that you have too much power. So if you're experiencing this right now, you got to go. Um, I can't like you got to leave. You got to get out of there. If you are actively being sabotaged, because there's no fighting against that type of a system. In my experience where this has happened, I would advocate. I would say, hey, this is exactly what I'm looking for, because again, documentation is king, queen, all the things. So I would have meetings with my senior leadership and I would say, hey, I just want to stress, these are my expectations. This is where I'm trying to be title wise, pay wise within the next 2 years. Is this in alignment? And I would have these meetings, right? In the next 6 months, are you comfortable with us starting that progression process? If 6 months came and went, and I met with them again and they pushed because this is how they get you. They push the goalposts down the way. That's a consistent way of sabotage. Oh, well, in 2 quarters, we'll come back to it, because they know they're not going to promote you. They don't want you to grow beyond them. I, though, made a covenant to myself, and I want you to make this same covenant. If you go to your leader, let's say you have a sabotaging leader and you say, hey, in 3 months' time, I'd really like to be on this growth pathway. I've been in the role for X amount of time and this is really important to me because blah, blah, blah. And they say, yeah, of course, absolutely. And then 3 months goes by, or however many months goes by, they're not doing it. It's time for you to make that decision. Okay, it's time for me to go. Start preparing your resume, start getting your LinkedIn snappy, and start heading out. Because by the time you're ready to go and you've gotten that next opportunity, they're going to think, oh, I've got them. They're going to stay here. And a lot of people do. A lot of people, unfortunately, stay decades at an organization because they're waiting for that opportunity, but you're not going to do that. If you have a situation like this, I cannot stress enough that it is important that you say, you know what? Okay, they're not going to do it. Now, there are some situations where a company will be like, listen, we really want to promote you, but there's stuff that's been going on and here's what we can do. Like, they'll offer you a professional development stipend, or they'll pay for your conference attendance. Like, obviously, not every situation is the same. And a lot of organizations, I cannot tell you how many times I have genuinely wanted to promote somebody on my team and we could not afford it as a company, or it just wasn't in the business plan, or maybe it was originally, but then things changed. It did not mean we didn't want to. But I always came to the table, though, with what I could do. Because I would say, hey, listen, I know that we discussed you'd be on this pathway by now. unfortunately, like I cannot do it because XYZ. I would always give the business case, much to the chagrin of the senior leaders I worked with, but I was always transparent, like, here's why. But here's what we can do. That if you're getting that response, don't jump ship right away because your leadership is trying to work with you. They don't have to do that. And they genuinely want you to know that they're trying to support you. But if they're not doing that and they keep kicking that goalpost just a little bit more every quarter, they don't have an intention of promoting you. So you have to promote yourself. Do not let your job stop you from finding your promotion. Okay. And there are a lot of studies out there. I've quoted them before in other videos that you can sometimes earn 35 to 65% upwards of your salary just by shifting every 2 years. And a lot of people, that is how they move every 2 years. They're on the, because they know that they're significantly faster salary trajectory. And even in this hiring market. So start making those plans if that's your experience. We have 15 minutes left at Beverly's break room, so I want to give time and space for comments. Keep kicking in here, comments and questions from the audience as we're getting close to wrapping up. Somebody said here, can you negotiate your severance? I feel stuck at my job, but I'm starting to feel like it's time for a change. So if you're being laid off, yes, you can negotiate your severance. If you're being laid off or you know a layoff is coming, absolutely. A lot of people do not negotiate their severance. They just accept what's handed to them and then they move on. Now, here's the thing that's really important. When you are negotiating, if you when you are negotiating severance because of a layoff, it is, if you can get a lawyer on retainer, even just paying the fee, or a family member who's a lawyer who can put something on letterhead for you, and you can have them put on the letterhead, you accept the terms of the layoff upon agreement to, and then you include what you believe that severance package to be. Typically, if you are in a leadership track, that is anywhere between 4 weeks to 3 months. Some places has been as long as 4 months negotiated, I've seen. Now these companies will try to play in your face and give you 2 weeks. If you are on the leadership track though, and you've been at a company for longer than a year, especially if you've been longer for 2 or 3, you absolutely can fight back and say no. Like you're, and if they see that on official letterhead, they just want to be done a lot of the time. And I've seen it where the lawyers will start talking and then they'll concede. And you can also negotiate for other elements too in that element. So that letterhead can be really helpful if you have a family member who's a lawyer, if you have somebody, or if you want to pay that quick retainer, you can just say, hey, I just really need a letterhead email and document drafted up for me. How much is that going to cost? And a lot of organizations, they won't pay you a super arm and a leg to do that, but it does help you, because if you try to go yourself, it won't be seen as a lot of leaders will push back on that because they'll be like, no. But then once legal starts talking, okay, they're gonna listen. If you want to leave an organization though, and I've actually gotten this question a few times where people have wanted to self severance, like where they're like, hey, I want to quit. This isn't an alignment. If you pay me out of severance, I'll leave. I will be transparent that I have never seen that work out in my career. I know I'm not the only person with an experience though. So if you've had an experience where this is successful, by all means, let me know. But the reason why I would never recommend going to your company and saying, as a chief operating officer, going to your company and saying, hey, like I just don't really feel like this is a fit. If you negotiate a severance with me, like let's dip out of here. Well, you've now told this company that is currently providing you your stability that you don't want to work there anymore and you're not aligned, which it very much exposes you. And I will tell you, some of the pettiest people I've ever met are leaders. When they feel slighted, any niceties go out the window. So if they feel, and a lot of leaders feel slighted when you're like, hey, I'm moving on to my next opportunity, because it feels like a betrayal, because a lot of them, as we said at the beginning of our chat today, right, are enmeshed. So that's one reason why that's not wise. The second reason why it's not wise is because now you are playing offense with if you don't have a backup plan, that isn't really helpful either, because you can't, from my understanding and recognition of unemployment, if you quit, you can't get unemployment, even if they give you a severance. So if they fire you, like if they lay you off, you get severance. If they restructure you, you get severance. If you get rift or not sorry, not severance, unemployment. If you get rift, they give you unemployment. If you get they won't fight that. But if you quit, then you try to file for unemployment, they're going to fight back on that because they're going to say, well, you quit. So why would we pay that? So don't cut out your potential safety nets. If you're not liking where you are, just start that pathway towards going to that next opportunity and getting your resume up and applying and and if it's something that's impacting your mental health, that's where I've said in previous videos, FMLA, short-term disability, if you're able to get the proper documentation from your providers, if your company qualifies for that, and has those outcomes, that's also another way that you can give yourself some runway if you're like, I'm done. Let's see. Looking at some comments here. I have a comment here that said, I had a leader that was learning how to lead and didn't know how to provide wisdom and how to grow. Left that job almost 3 years ago and moved out of the state, still looking for a job in that field. That happens a lot. Unfortunately, there are people who are put into leadership positions that should have been in independent contributor positions. If you all are not familiar with the difference between IC and management track, that is literally the difference. And I actually introduced this to a company once because I said, listen, we were promoting people who did not want to lead teams. They did not want to be leaders. And I said, why are we doing this? And I remember the leadership being like, well, because they're doing a great job and we want to promote them. I said, but if we want to promote them, we don't have to promote them and have them lead people. We can promote them on an independent contributor track. And they were like, and I introduced this and built it at this, when I worked in tech, I built the entire infrastructure where I created an IC track and a management track so that when we wanted to promote folks who were quality at their day-to-day jobs, right? And the tasks and the task management of their jobs, we were promoting them, but we weren't making them responsible for people because there's a lot of damage that gets done when people are not leaders and are put in leadership positions. I am somebody who genuinely loves being a leader. I love nurturing and growing people on my teams. I love being challenged by them and growing because of them, right? And because I believe my teams have just as much to teach me as I do to teach them. I am naturally a leader, and so I have found myself really honored to have been able to work alongside incredible teams that were alongside me, and that was a choice, right? So you can understand that there's a very different way that you're going to carry yourself when it's a choice to lead people. There's all types of best practices. There's stuff that you invest in to make sure that you're doing it right, versus this person's been promoted a bunch of times because they are friends with the CEO or they're friends with the directors or they're friends with whomever, and now the rest of the company is suffering for it because this person absolutely should not be near people, let alone be leading people. And it happens far too often. So my recommendation would be, organizations, if you're a leader who has any sway and you're watching this, tell your companies about independent contributor tracks where people can still grow in their own tracks, but they don't necessarily have to be responsible for people. I think that businesses everywhere would be significantly happier. People everywhere would be significantly happier if they had folks. Frankly, I think the leaders themselves would be significantly happier if they could say, you know what? Yeah. Because I think deep down they know they're not good at it. A lot of them don't care anymore, but a lot of them do. But what are you going to do? You've been promoted on this track for so long, you're not going to step down if you feel like there's nowhere lateral for you to go. So that's definitely something to think about. Let's see some comments here. Someone said, my experience is impacting my mental and physical health, but I can't afford to not be paid through FMLA. I might do another Beverly's break room on this because I got a lot of comments like this when I talked about, go through FMLA and her sister ADA because it's real. But that's a real reality. A lot of folks cannot afford to take FMLA, and so then what do you do? Of course, investigate if your company has a short-term disability policy because a lot of folks don't know that they have that. And another thing is check your company's retirement policies. I have a client who works for the federal government, and her specific department within the federal government, she said it was because of my video. She looked at her employee contract, and in her employee contract, she found that they had a retirement clause that she qualified for, even though she'd been working there a very long time, but she's not old by any means at all, or older, I should say. I want to be respectful, but she's not like retirement age at all. And she qualifies for it. And so she's been actively starting that process, among others who have been starting that process. So you just don't know. I always recommend people do not read their employee handbooks. And I know they're big and they're bulky. And as somebody who has written them, I get it. I get it. But there are so many resources in there. I would highly recommend check in there and see if there are things that are available. Some people, like, for example, I worked at an organization where I required us to have a bereavement clause. So if you were experiencing, and I also required us to have a mental health leave clause, and it was the first of its kind for that organization. I said, listen, I think I specifically created, we had a bereavement, but it was specifically a next of kin clause. It was the first of its kind. I built it because I had seen throughout my career so many folks who um, uh, experience loss. I am fortunately at this age have experienced a lot of loss in my life, and so I know that it is very difficult to come back to work and be on after 3 days of bereavement. It doesn't make sense, especially if you're next of kin or if you're friends or your close family, and that was included in the clause. And so, we told the team about it, but who knows how many read that clause. So, make sure you're checking your employee handbooks because you don't know what could be available to you within the system, that could actually help you. Right. All right. Want a couple of questions. Oh, here's a question. How do you handle situations where they only want a crew of people of the same racial group in the job and anyone different is treated badly? Well, first and foremost, again, as I've said now on this platform many times, you are federally protected if by for several classes. And if you have not grabbed my dealing with bullies class at my website, I cannot stress enough, and I'm going to actually share my screen so that everybody can see this, because if you have not gone to beverlydines.com, please head there, because I have a class called Dealing with Bullies at Work. Okay. It's an hour-long class, and I walk through what to navigate and how to document, how to protect yourself, how to literally fight back if you are navigating discrimination. Because frankly, if you are being ostracized, if you're being alienated at your job because of you're not a certain color, or you don't speak the language, or you don't, whatever the case, I can't stress enough, y'all, that it's protected. It's protected. So protect yourself, and grab resources. This is my website, beverlydines.com. If you're not sure, maybe you're like, Beverly, I don't know. I'm experiencing something at work, but I'm not really sure if it is discrimination. I'm not really sure what it is. Y'all, you can book an empowerment session with me. I'm meeting with people all the time, every week, who book with me, who want questions answered, who book packages with me. But make sure you're heading to beverlydines.com. I have free resources here as well. But this class right here, Dealing with Bullies at Work, is going to really help you be able to discern, your specific and unique situation, and whether or not it is protected. Because if you are being discriminated against and you can absolutely see a pattern of discrimination, the EOC is waiting for you. And so is that potential check that could come with that, because a lot of people don't fight back. Um, this was the first ever Beverly's Break Room, and I'm just so excited that we are here gathered today, right before we hit the week. And a couple of things before we close. First, thank you for making time on this Sunday to be on with me. If you're watching the recap on YouTube, thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said, my name is Beverly. I'm a chief operating officer. I'm your chief empowerment officer. And if you are wanting to, especially if you're watching this on a Sunday, go to my website and register. You still have some time to register for Sunday Scaries. That's going to be in 1 minute at 7 p.m. So I have to jump over there. And that is going to be the space where I'm going to be teaching. I teach every Sunday at 7 p.m. so that you don't have to navigate Sunday Scaries alone. And it's free. FREE. That spells free. I will see you there, and make sure you like, please comment on my on the stream, and boost it. But then, of course, please subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Please follow if you're watching this on Instagram, because we are going to be back here again tomorrow at 6 p.m. sharp with a new topic and new tea to talk through. So I look forward to seeing you then. Head to my website if you'd like to meet with me this week, because I got openings this week, y'all. I got openings this week. So I will see you then. And may God bless you and keep you. Thank you all so much.